as far as I'm concerned, the more smart, developed leaders that I have around me, just makes us a stronger organization, period. Um, and I think I've proved that with allies.
Sean DeYoung makes leaders. You heard in his own words. I don't know if he intentionally set out to do that or if that's just a byproduct of who he is, but Sean DeYoung makes leaders, and we're happy to hear his stories and share why he does what he does. Enjoy.
Well, I want to start with saying our values journey really started with the engagement with Jump, with you guys. When I started with the organization, I worked with the board to redevelop our mission and vision, but we really had never talked about values. We had some stated values, but it really hadn't been transmitted to the agency at large as it currently stood. It might have 15 years ago, but not, when we engaged each other 2 years ago. So it was a really interesting experience for me. I knew what I had in my heart for what my values are. And I think what was eye-opening to me was through the process when we were engaging our leadership team, just the idea of everyone's values are a little bit different, but we didn't have anything concrete to coalesce around inside of the organization. We didn't have anything on our website to say, this is what we value, and people look at the website before they apply. So they might have their own internal, value matrix. And I know I did, but it was interesting to see the differences in the leadership team and some of the similarities, and being able to coalesce around, quality, community, accountability, respect, and engagement.
The old Q care.
The Q care. And working with the team to develop that and then incorporate that into the organization, so that, I think all the new staff coming on, they see the website, they know what it is. We talk about it in the interview process and the onboarding process. And I talk about it in our staff meetings. And it's now on every agenda what our values are. I incorporated in my board meetings so that the board knows what our values are. And it's part of their board orientation as well, so that they know what our values are. But going through that process was really, really interesting to me. And you were part of that process, a big part of that process, but to have the conversations with staff to develop those things, we had our core leadership team kind of coalesced around what it was going to be, but to spread it out and then to show that scatter plot that you had of here's where everybody's at and all of their statements about their values was, I think, just really dynamic for the organization. Because I don't think anyone had thought about it.
Well, it was to say the work that you had driven there was not only inspiring but fulfilling. As somebody who worked at that organization, it really was it really was great to be a part of that. But what I'm curious about is, what is it that drove you as a leader to be able to want to do that work, to push the organization in that area? You talked about your own core values, but so where did you come up with your core values? Is that something you've always had? And I'm doing a bad thing of stacking questions here, but I guess maybe let's go back a little bit and tell me about your values journey that ultimately led up to that.
Well, I think that for me, just going back in my development as a social worker, um, the things that we outlined for the agency values really align with what was developed. And I think it was early engagement for me with a large national organization that had a big training program that really instilled their values and were very out front with it. And that was when I first started working in the field. I worked for a national organization called Father Flanagan's Boys Town, which has been around for over 100 years. They have a very specific way of, their model of care, and everything was very well structured. And that's where, for me, the quality came in, was such a big thing, because in terms of providing quality care, having quality documentation, everything else translated to providing excellent care to the client. Community engagement, being accountable to the community that we serve. I mean, all of that was sort of baked into me as a young social worker. And obviously being respectful, from a DEI perspective, was super important. And community engagement was just huge. So, all of those, when we initially sat down and started talking about this stuff, I hadn't thought about all of it. And this helped me really kind of wrap my brain around, what my values were growing up as a social worker, and now 30 years later, almost 30 years later, landing where we landed. And so I mean, that was a big thing for me. And that translated to other organizations that I worked with. So, after I left Father Flanagan's Boys Town, my next, I'd say big job was, running a Christian foster care agency, the Bear Foundation. And they had very stated values that were similar, but when I came to Allies, I realized, one of the other values that I have that's not one of these stated values is training. Mm-hmm. So that was my focus when I came to Allies for Health and Wellbeing, was my staff need to be better trained. We need to get an HR infrastructure, because we had no HR director. But we need to train our staff better. We need to train them on trauma-informed care. We need an EAP program. And that for me comes into the respect thing for the staff, is making sure that our staff are supported and that they're being well trained and they have support. Part of that goes into also development of my leadership team, which is why I engaged Jump, because I wanted, more engagement with my leadership team. And emotional intelligence is a big thing for me. So having you come in to help us with that was really, really big, and obviously a big part of what we worked on was working on values, but also working on how we can better manage our meetings, which is a respect thing for our staff too. So that was really just really huge for me. But, one of the first things you said to me when we got engaged was, you have no value statements on your website. And I said, wow, I hadn't thought about that, so that was really, really big. And we had amazing discussion and creation of this. And we got feedback from all the leadership and also all of the staff, because we had all of our leadership team meet with their staff to talk about, values and what their values were and where they were at. And, we were able to come together and really create, I think, something special in terms of what we put together. And now we talk about it all the time.
That's amazing. And what's interesting is that as you articulate this stuff, and I'm listening, it is really your values, not just words that you put on a wall or not a personal statement that you have, but you are actually putting in action those things which you espouse from a values perspective. So talking about your career earlier and how you're progressing. And the other thing that I have noted through some of the work that we've done together is that you're like a leader creator. So within your organization, you're developing really strong leaders.
Yeah.
Your C4 leadership team is you have a great team, and it continues below there. But not only that, you are making leaders in the region. There's people who have spun out of your organization who are, CEOs of other organizations, right? So
Alicia's a good example. I know she did a podcast
yes.
with you. I saw she posted
Yes.
that.
So I had to get her in, because I think what's happening in the ecosystem that you're creating is rather unique, and it's rather special. And that's why I wanted to make sure that you were one of the first people I spoke with, because I see the impact that the values, not just the exercise of doing it to check the box, or, okay, we've got a statement there that says that. You attacked it from a different perspective. And that's what I was really curious about, because it seems like it came from someplace deeper than just, oh yeah, we need to put this out there. It's a thing that we should do. That's not the sense that I got.
Yeah, well, this is something that, I want to say some of the organizations I work for were transformative for me, in terms of how an agency should operate and run. And I know in my head how I think things should go, and when I came to, it was Pittsburgh AIDS Task Force back then, not Allies for Health and Wellbeing. The board had a vision, to open up a health clinic. And how are we going to get there? And I came into basically a skeleton crew, 23 staff, 2 directors, had no finance director, never had an HR director. And I knew through some of my other experiences, because I volunteered for an accreditation agency and got to visit some really, really great organizations, some really, really bad organizations, and saw how things could be and how things shouldn't be. And, when I came in, the first hire I made was my HR director, because, an agency has to have good human resources. And if you want to hire staff, fire staff, get good benefits, set up an EAP program, because we didn't have one, I needed to have that. So that was the first thing I saw. And I learned that through my experiences with other high performing organizations. And also my experiences working with the Council on Accreditation and going out and seeing other nonprofits and see, what's good, what's bad, because you evaluate all those things.
Right.
And again, we had no finance director, we had no CFO, either, and having to hire somebody to do that and just get us on track. I mean, we were in good shape financially, but the other part for me goes back to the quality, and our value statement. The quality of the care that we were providing was substandard, in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
And I dove into that right away as well, and just looking at who we had on staff, how stressed our staff were in terms of their caseloads, which were really, really high. We had money in our grant to hire more staff, and that hadn't happened before I came. So, that was like my immediate moves were, one, let me get with the people that are giving us the money to make sure that we're okay in terms of standing, because I was afraid we might lose our grant. And I laid out sort of my plan for, we're going to hire these staff, we're going to put this training in place, we're going to, if we have to exit staff that are not appropriately in the right position, we will do that so that I don't lose my grant. and that's what I did. And then I could build from there. And
your trajectory and the growth that you've experienced, I want to say just even the last 5 years, there's so much that has happened. How, because when you talk and we discuss these things, I see delineation between strategic things that you're working on and things that you're working towards, and then I also see sort of tactical excellence that you implore as trying to reach your strategic objectives. One question that I think I'm curious about, and maybe other leaders or aspiring leaders may want to know, is through all those trials and tribulations, and even times when it's not good, how have those values that you've had, have they come along for the journey? Do you set them aside? How do they influence you as you've gone through that journey? Not just the great times, right? Because it's easy to talk about the good times, but in those challenging times, how have those values served you?
Tremendously, because I look at what we created in terms of the values that we've set out for the organization. Every single one of them has been important. The quality piece is still super, super important. And that's served us through a number of phases. So, as you stated, we've come a long way. I just had my 8th anniversary.
Oh,
with
congrats.
the organization. Thank you. When we started, we had 23 staff. Now we have 50. Was about $800,000. We just added a new program, and we're like $3.4 million now.
Wow.
We've grown it a lot, and that's allowed me to add a quality improvement person that can monitor quality. It's afforded me to add all of the different managers we have, because our leadership team is now, I don't know, 14 people or whatever it is. It's big. And I had 2 directors when I started. So I was able to create a COO position, which allowed me to engage in that community engagement piece and get our brand out there and our name out there and make people aware of what we were doing in the community, because people were not aware. So all of these values have really helped us progress, and also being accountable. So people know, here's our, annual report, here's our outcome measures, because we didn't have those before, to show, and again, for your podcast, we do work with the HIV community to show that people are being virally suppressed and getting good care, so that throws it out there, doing more community events and engaging the community. So community and engagement kind of go hand in hand to me. So yeah, I've been able to carry those values forward, and it's really made our agency so much more strong because of that.
How do you engage leaders within, or even like emerging leaders in your organization and allies? You know, what are some of those things that you do to sort of think about leadership development with them?
Well, I think about it a lot. And again, this kind of goes
Given
back
this core
to,
value of training, that doesn't surprise me.
yeah, this kind of goes back to, again, my coming up in the system. I was lucky enough to work for 3 different organizations that really valued leadership development, starting with Father Flanagan's Boys Town, Bear Foundation, Family Links, leadership training, and the value of having strong leaders around you. I mean, just makes you a stronger organization. And I know some of my peers get intimidated by that. But as far as I'm concerned, the more smart, developed leaders that I have around me just makes us a stronger organization, period. And I think I've proved that with allies.
Not
I
only did
started,
you not only I think you're proving that at allies, but I think the influence that you're having in the region, and I will toot your horn a little bit here because I can, and it's my podcast. So I am also aware that you are not just working within your organization, you're collaborating with others for the benefit of the community, right? So
yeah,
to me, that even goes even beyond looking at your organization and saying, yes, these are the things that are important to us. This is how we do it. But you know what? We are also value community, and community sometimes means, doing the right thing, partnering with others, seeing how we can sort of, expand what we do. And to me, that's incredibly inspiring. So, and I'm
yeah,
referring to some of the work that you're doing with Alicia's organization, and it's
yeah. And
been recognized, right?
that's a great example. Working with Alicia's group, she approached me about a year ago about this program that they had that was a Ryan White program, and wanted to know if it was a good mission fit for their organization. And they're primarily a homelessness services organization,
CHS, right?
yeah, CHS. And I said, I don't know if it's a great mission fit. So we continued to talk about it, and then she approached me and said, hey, would you be willing to take this over? And we did a lot of collaboration to do that, and now we have the program, which is why my Ryan White budget grew more. we took the program over. But the other part of it, again, goes back to that community engagement piece and getting our brand out there. So I'm now the chair of the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership,
Oh, wow.
which oversees, it's part of a foundation here in Pittsburgh called the Forbes Funds, which has about 270 nonprofit agencies that are part of it. And
Wow.
I'm now the chair of that. I'm also their public policies chair. So, again, spreading the message of what we all do and being stronger together is an important piece. And, talking about community engagement and meeting with your legislators and spreading the message about how you can engage your staff, educate your staff, develop your leadership is a big piece. And and that's not the only one. I'm part of a bunch of different coalitions like that. But the other one is, we have a group here in Pittsburgh called AIDS Free Pittsburgh, which is a collaborative group of people that are working in the HIV space, and I'm the vice chair of that organization. But again, it's about talking about best practices, education, talking, and since we've been engaged, talking about values. So, I'm looking more at their websites and saying, what are your values for your organization?
Yeah, it could be a common language that really crosses, certain paradigms. It's a way to, in my opinion, it's a way to engage where maybe you didn't have an opportunity or the right nomenclature to connect with another, not just another person in your organization, but within your community. I know, and this is what's very exciting, is that the work that you're doing, not just with allies in that community, is incredibly important, but what you're doing in that region is, I think, even just as significant, and actually has even more impact for more people. So when I heard about the collaboration that CHS and Allies was doing, and also that you guys were getting recognition for that outside, like even in the media and the press,
Yeah.
for me, that was sort of light bulb that says, oh man, there's something happening. And I'm really engaged to see where this is going for you, because I think from a leadership perspective, this is pretty wild stuff. At least I think it is. And I'm really wanting to see what comes out of this, what comes next. How does the community react, and how does the region react, and is this a catalyst for other things to sort of start to spring open? So I think this is very embryonic, but I think that there's a lot there that could happen, and it all starts with sort of your vision and what you were doing, and how it was rooted in sort of your idea of training, your idea of community, right? And what happened earlier in your career and how that set off. And to me, I find that very, very inspiring. And I'm probably on my soapbox, but
I have to add, one of the big things for me, for the organization, was just diving headfirst into, all right, I had like no staff. Diving into my first day of work was the day that the construction started on our health clinic.
Yeah.
Needing to find a doctor, needing to hire medical staff, but then looking to expand. And for your podcast crew, we have a pharmacy program, so needing to expand our pharmacy program because that is a profit generator. And and this is one of the things that I'm looking to talk to, like when we meet with the St. Francis folks, looking at where you can have a benefit, where you can expand your opportunities. So I looked at the pharmacy program as an opportunity to, where can we have other access points to this government pharmacy program that we have? Not just be limited to one little teeny piece of it, because if we can expand it, we can generate more money, which is going to help us support the clinic, which is going to help us get more staff. And that was a really, really important piece to our growth, was doing that and diving into that and understanding that. And that allowed me to create the COO position. And I also negotiated with Pennsylvania to expand our Ryan White grant, but not being afraid to go after it. And I think that one of the things I talk about with my public policy group, with the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership, is sort of demystifying meeting with your elected officials. And that makes a big difference, especially in the nonprofit world. Letting your legislators know where you're at, what you're doing, what you need, And the same goes for the foundation community. So I'm speaking specifically to your audience that work in nonprofits. Meet meet with your foundations,
Mm.
whether you need money or not.
Yeah.
Meet with them and let them know where things are.
Goes to engagement.
Because when you need support, then they know who you are, they know what you need. Prime example, when I first started and we opened up the health clinic, my predecessor did no community engagement at all to raise money to build the health clinic, and it was $1.2 million.
Oh, wow.
And they were just planning on paying out of reserves. And I ended up funding the whole thing because of engagement after the fact to get foundations to support it. And I've been meeting with those foundations ever since, and 8 years have gone by. And one of the foundations that gave me, I think it was $200,000 at the beginning for the clinic, I met with a couple months ago to let them know, hey, we're building a pharmacy. I need $400,000 to build the pharmacy. And they gave me the money.
Wow.
I mean, we just got the check a couple weeks ago.
That
So
investment pays dividends for sure.
but it's building relationships. You got to build those, especially in the nonprofit world. You got to build the relationship, and no matter what city you're in, it's still a small community. I mean, I
Right.
talk about 280 or 250 nonprofits that are part of the GPNP, but that covers a number of counties. But it's still a small community, and those foundations have different, funding priorities and whatnot. But you need to know them. You need to meet with them to understand exactly, where to go to look for certain pots of money. And if you do good work, you have good quality, you have good community engagement, they're going to support you.
Going right back to the values. It's a great way to sort of bring it full circle. Cool. I want to shift gears for a sec here and just ask, as we start to wrap things up here. I may have asked you this before, but I'm curious to see what your answer is again. If I had to ask you, who are or who is like your heroes, maybe from growing up or now, who would they be?
I have a couple, and I have a new one since the last time we discussed this. One of my mentors, I mean, aside from my parents, I love my parents. One of my mentors passed away last year. His name was David Kerr, and he worked for Boys Town. He's from Pennsylvania. We met in Florida when I lived in Florida, and really kind of got me into this line of work. But what always stuck out for me was just his selflessness and how much he was willing to give of himself, to social work and the families that he worked with. So he was a hero for me. I think when we did our workshops, there was a Monsignor that used to live next door to my grandparents that was also just a big figure for me. His name was Monsignor Green. He would actually come and do mass on their front porch with us as a small group. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. So I mean, both of them were just huge. My grandfather is probably my biggest hero, and he was a war hero, and also gave selflessly, to the community. and whatnot. So they were just all, and again, aside from my parents, they were all very, very important in my development.
Very cool. Thank you for that. If there was one takeaway you wanted somebody who's listening um to think about on their values journey and how it impacts their leadership style, what would that be?
I don't know if I could have one takeaway. I think there's just a lot of takeaways. I think,
I'll give you up to three. We only have 24 hours in a day.
well, what I learned through the process was you need to look at where your value statements are. You need to understand that everybody coming into your organization might have similarities, but not be completely aligned with what your agency's values are. And it's important to coalesce around specific agency values so that they can come together on that and understand that, because otherwise it's scattered. So that was one of my biggest takeaways from our values journey, was how there were similarities, but how spread everything was.
Mm.
And you want everything to come together so that everybody's sort of on the same page, not sort of on the same page, on the same page,
Right.
on that, on your agency's values. So that, I would say, was one of my biggest takeaways of that process, was just understanding how spread everything could be with your leadership team or your full staff, and how important it was to bring everything down to specific values that people could focus on, so that you didn't have people going off in different directions depending on their values.
Right.
But ultimately, I think we were able to do that, and we did a really good job about it. And the second takeaway is that continuing to talk about it, educate new staff that are coming in on it, reinforces that. And you told a story, I forget which organization you were part of, that you were working with, that you talked about how the CEO would weave in the values in
Yeah,
this conversation.
it was one of the most inspiring, and it was just like a Wednesday morning as he was introducing me to a team that I was going to be working with, and he was gracious enough to come down and do the introduction. And I'll never forget how I felt when he was doing that, because as he was talking, and I didn't usually, a lot of times, I may pass notes to the CEO or somebody, say, hey, listen, let's just make sure we cover these points. And this was complete sort of impromptu. He was there, he came down, he said, oh, I'll introduce you and get things rolling. I said, great. He went up, and as I was listening, I was really I was really taken aback, because that was one of the only times where he was articulating, and he was clearly doing it off the cuff. He wasn't prepared, but he literally hit down all of the values that worked, and that was an organization that was over 100 years old. And he literally hit all the values in his own words and articulated what it meant through the behaviors and how they're acting. And when he sort of came off stage, off to the side a little before I went on, I said, did you do this on purpose to hit all the values? He goes, what do you mean on purpose? He goes, I just sort of spoke. And for me, that really solidified that he was really connected, and that's really what was inspiring him. And you can see it just flew out of him. So that was pretty cool. It was one of the best examples I've ever seen of somebody sort of living the values, not just talking about them. So,
well, that really spoke to me, and that, when we talked about that initially, why it was so important for us to create our value statements and solidify that it's not just something written on a piece of paper, that this is what we embody as an organization. and imbibing that into the culture of the organization, you
Yep,
know.
yeah, it will definitely give passion, energy, focus, a lot to an organization when you have that, I call it the values congruence factor. When you have that values congruence, you're not everybody's going to agree all the time, right? It's not realistic, but to have that common set that you can rely on is critically important. And Allies is an example of that in motion. Sean, is if people wanted to reach out and talk to you about your leadership style, what leadership means to you, what are some tips for leadership, or talk about Allies more in depth, what would be the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
Either probably via email, which is SDEYOUNG at alliespgh.org. But I'm always welcome to take a call too, which is 412-414-0990.
Cool.
So, you know, I'm open always to talk to folks about leadership, you know, the different leadership trainings that I've had. But I can honestly say, Thomas, that your engagement with us was probably the best that I've had in my career. So I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. But I see my role as sort of like that Sherpa. It doesn't mean anything until you have the right people executing, right? So that for me, that's what's important. And Allies has really picking that up and just taking it to a different level. So from my perspective, it's you and the team that really should be highlighted.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Well, hey, listen, thanks.
Picking the right team and getting people on board.
Yeah, that's a whole other, exactly. Listen, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. And I definitely know we'll be talking soon.
Yes, we will.
Thanks,
Take care,
brother.
my friend.
All right.